You're listening to the Wedding Biz Network, the voice of the creative entrepreneur. Hey everyone, it's Andy Kushner, host of The Wedding Biz, and I want to remind you that I've launched a podcast network called The Wedding Biz Network, which features podcasts hosted by a group of event professionals who have previously been on the show. And we've begun by featuring The Business of Being Creative with Sean Lowe, which releases episodes every Tuesday morning. You can go to theweddingbiz.com to listen or search on your cell phone's podcast app for The Business of Being Creative. It's really a wonderful show. Congratulations, Sean. So, Friday of last week, I released a bonus episode with floral designer Preston Bailey talking about racial injustice. It was a very powerful conversation. I urge you to go back and listen. And then just this past Monday, I released an interview with Kathy Sharp Ross, author of the book Reinvent Your Life. What are you waiting for? So reinventing ourselves is obviously not easy, and we all can use help with how to think about such a topic for our own lives and businesses. So you can check out Monday's release with Kathy. Then on Wednesday, I featured a conversation with Colin Cowie to hear how he's doing both personally and how he's handling his business in dealing with the current pandemic. Really wonderful episode. So today's bonus episode is with Alan Shukovsky, who is located in New York City and is the executive director of event sales and marketing for the Glass Houses, 2 new event venues in New York City. He is a member of a Manhattan-based task force for events and catering in New York City, and the task force is made up of 30 plus of some of the most prominent properties and local event professionals in the city. And their purpose was essentially to collaborate and create a system of protocols, checks and balances for running events during and after the COVID-19 pandemic, and for both event professionals and their clients to feel safe. So at a minimum, listening to this conversation will give you a host of important issues and ideas to think about. So enjoy this conversation with Alan Shukovsky. Alan, it's really nice to have you on the show, especially with such short notice. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Lots to talk about and really grateful for the opportunity to chat.
Yeah, sure. Well, before we dive into what this conversation about the task force is all about and what it's accomplishing, can you first tell us briefly about Glass House and your position with them?
Yes, of course. I am the executive director of sales at the Glass House, and it's a brand new venue on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It will occupy a full city block from 48th to 49th Street. It is immediately adjacent to 12th Avenue. It runs to 11th Avenue, so it's big space. In one of the most exciting areas of New York City. We're obviously just north of Hudson Yards, and we all understand the development that's happening there. And it's a really unique catering venue. I've spent years and years at very large luxury hotels. In fact, I was formerly the director of private social catering at the Waldorf in New York City, probably the largest luxury hotel in New York City. So it's very much in my wheelhouse. And since the historic restoration of the Waldorf, its closing a number of years ago, New York has really coveted a venue for large events, probably more important now than ever, not because we expect to be doing immediately events for 1,000 or 1,500 people, but just because of the spatial demands that customers have now and the idea that they don't want to pack people on top of one another. So having a big space is really important. And it ticks the boxes of what makes many New York City venues special. So there's outdoor space, which is great. There are iconic views, which are amazing. I think these terms have really been commoditized, but, a blank canvas or a raw space, that really gives people the opportunity to put something together that's very creative, but at the same time, the amenities are on par with the luxury hotel experience. So there are lots of these blank canvas spaces that you go into, and there's a significant amount of additional work that's required to bring in furniture and chairs and tables and china, and you're the list is never ending. And frankly, the expense associated with is enormous. But the Glass House comes with all of those things. So for so many reasons, what I think puts a venue from a desirability perspective, size, outdoor space, crazy views, etc., what makes those spaces unique, the Glass House ticks all of those boxes. And I don't know that there's a comparable venue that's the size that we are right now.
Well, let's dive into this. I mean, and by the way, normally when we can travel, I'm in New York City every 2 to 4 months. And so when I can get back in again, I definitely want to come by and say hello and see it in person. So,
we'd love to have you by. Absolutely.
Yeah. So as far as the task force that you're a member of, I understand that, and in a minute, certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but that it's a task force for events and catering in New York City, though certainly all across the country, we could take a hard look at what you're coming up with, the research and the suggestions that you're coming up with, but that it's a group of, I believe, 30 most prominent properties in New York City and third-party planners, a lot of people who have been on my show to tell basically politicians how to, as you had said earlier when we first met, how they can bounce back stronger and have some protocols, some best practices moving forward. Did I describe how the task force is made up accurately?
Yeah, pretty solid. It began as a much more intimate group. And it was just a bunch of event professionals that quickly identified that the dialogue and the discourse was very much about restaurants and about hotel rooms. And there's this entire events market that doesn't fall under either of those categories that represents $10 billion of revenue in New York City and, employs a whole bunch of people. Our fear collectively was that our leadership, our governmental leaders would enact a protocol that requires all spaces to play by the same set of rules.
Yeah, doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. So we have a venue that is about 7,000 square feet, and it's called the Glass House Chelsea. And we have a venue which is going to be 30,000 square feet of usable event space, all in the front of the house. So they're pretty disparate venues. And I just use us as the example. If our Glass House Chelsea and the Glass House that we're building right now had to play by the same set of rules, I think you can understand the absurdity that represents.
Yeah, well, it depends on square space, airflow. There's just so much more to it. These numbers across the United States, I'm hearing, maximum of 50 people or 100 people. I mean, there's no sense to it.
Absolutely true. But, without the information, how do we envisage that our leaders and our governmental leaders, have the consciousness to make the decision that makes doing an event practicable and that creates an environment where spaces and their particular areas of specialty are able to function at a very high level. So you're 100% right. You can't expect a space that can accommodate under normal circumstances 50 people and a space like ours, which is huge and can accommodate a conference for 1,200 people to work with the same capacity. It's not practicable. And frankly, a lot of the members of this coalition are not going to be able to survive if they have to play by a uniform set of rules. So, we wanted to, number one, address how we could come back bigger and stronger. But most importantly, we wanted to create an environment that allows our team members and our clients and their guests the opportunity to come back to a space that allows them to feel safe. And I will attribute what I'm about to say to Alan Kurtz, who is from the Ziegfeld and Gotham Hall, who I know personally.
Yeah, I've known him one of my first big mitzvahs, like multi-million-dollar mitzvah, was at Gotham. So yeah, sure, know Alan very well.
Alan's a great guy, and he was instrumental in putting this group together with James Munns, who's also at the Ziegfeld, and Mike Warren from the Plaza. But the reason I brought Alan up, other than to give him credit for really being the leader of this cause, was something he said in the last call. Right now, we're in the confidence business. And if our guests do not feel confident going back to the business of doing events and feel secure in the protocols that we're taking to sanitize our space and to adapt to a COVID and post-COVID environment and ensure that their attendees feel safe, then people aren't going to run back to the events that we desperately need to be successful and to return to what it is we do best. That was the goal of all this. We looked at a bunch of different categories, and the participants in this broke into their areas of particular specialty. Those specialties were, the guest experience, food and beverage service, sanitation, sanitization and cleaning, and the list is much more broad than that. But we broke up into subcommittees, and we put together a document that addresses, all of what is sensible for us to do. And it is, a vision for what we can do to enact an environment that allows people to feel safe and how we go about it. And, the material changes that need to be made, suggestions for capital investment, really leave no stone unturned in the pursuit of a safe environment for our work teams and for our guests. So, it was really a great experience. It was an unparalleled level of cooperation between a set of people that I think have historically looked at each other as enemies. But we very quickly recognized that if we didn't all return to the kind of business environment that existed pre-COVID, that we might not make it at all, that none of us would make it there. So, it was put together with great intentions.
So can you share some of the protocols, some of the major protocols that really anybody in the country would really be helpful to be aware of, that they might be able to apply in their own situations? Can you share some of those?
I mean, our document is a huge document. And the one that we ultimately shared with the governmental leadership was about 20 pages. So it's pretty broad. But obviously, until we come up with a vaccine for COVID, just understanding that the standard protocols are going to apply.
That's right.
There are going to need to be sanitizing stations throughout the buildings. It is likely that guests will be wearing face coverings, and obviously our staff will be doing so also. We talked about designating entrances and exits, and at spaces like ours, which have multiple entry points, designated an entrance and an exit so that you don't have two-way traffic. We're trying to maintain a distance environment as much as we can.
Oh, that's a good point.
Again, we're pretty fortunate in that we have terraces that are adjacent to our pre-function and function space. So our ability to open doors and prop open doors that are on fire exits and allow the appropriate airflow are beneficial. So things like that are going to be tremendous for us.
Can I back up for a minute, Alan?
Yes,
just for a minute.
Course.
Yeah, before we go on, the whole issue of wearing masks. I mean, obviously, it is necessary. The understanding now is mostly that when we wear a mask, we're protecting others. Given that we could be asymptomatic, we just don't know, or maybe been exposed, and symptoms have not yet manifested. So certainly understand the importance, the protocol for wearing masks. But just for a moment, it's so hard for me to picture being at an event, celebrating, for example, a wedding, where all the guests are wearing masks. What was the conversation like? Again, it's obvious why we have to wear masks, but what, in terms of the task force, what was the conversation like when that particular topic came up?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of concern from the hospitality environment that we all come from and live in. I think we were really focused on our team members wearing masks because, again, we covet their safety and the safety of the guests. Our presumption is that attending guests are going to be wearing masks. So things that became important as a result were we need to have points throughout our property where they could drop their masks off if they're changing them out or as they're leaving There have to be receptacles there that people can put their masks in. But I mean, there was all kinds of dialogue. One of the big questions, and it was debated pretty hotly on one of our Zoom calls, was how do you feel about branding a mask?
Yeah, they may as well be decorative, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, but something about seeing the Glass House logo on a mask is disturbing to me, to be completely honest.
Well, like anybody walking around, look, I've seen sound companies at events, because when we fly all around, we contract local sound companies, and we've had to tell them, because we'll see it, they'll wear shirts with their logo, and just seems completely inappropriate at an event to be branding, maybe beforehand while setting up, and perhaps after while breaking down, but not during the event.
I think you're exactly right, and I think it's fair. And I think that the idea of attending somebody's wedding and having everybody in face masks is not particularly attractive to people. I actually booked, believe it or not, a small event for 10 people, very short term, for our Glass House Chelsea location. And I fully expect they'll be wearing the mask, but there's a reason that event is now 10 people. I'm sure when they envisioned the wedding that they were going to have, it wasn't going to be 10 people. It wasn't going to be planned at the last minute, and it wasn't going to involve all 10 attendees wearing masks.
Right.
But this is our present day reality.
It is.
And like you said, this is the business of hospitality. And if you're an empathetic human being and you care about people, and the CDC makes the suggestion that you should be wearing a mask when you are in the company of another person, then we support that. Why would we ever want to put people in an environment where they become unwell? So, yeah, I mean, I think for the immediate future, we're going to be wearing masks when we interact with customers.
And I do want to get back to with you taking over, leading the conversation about the most important protocols. But what about, I'm also just curious when I think about the mask, people being seated. What did everyone come up with how many feet apart? That seems pretty complicated if we're going to be 6 feet apart at tables. I mean, geez.
Yeah, it's going to be really tricky. I don't think any of us have a crystal ball, and we don't understand what the guidance is going to be. So we didn't get very specific on what the seating protocol would be. We didn't suggest that, 6 people sit at a 72-inch table, right, or 4 people sit at a 60-inch table. And frankly, we didn't guess what the appropriate distancing protocol should be.
Okay.
What we've heard, because there have been some examples of what spaces that have opened throughout the country have been doing. I think it's likely that a couple of protocols will exist that require 36 square feet per person, based on 6 foot times 6 feet is 36 square feet.
Yeah.
I've heard another one where 28.2 might be the magic number, which, assumes a 3-foot diameter circle around everybody. And then if you're a person that has a circle around you, then you're 28.2, they're 28.2, assures 6 feet of distancing. And then that's the magic number.
Where couples can make it known that they're in a couple, they're in a family that have already been together, and then they obviously can sit closer. It's I guess this is going to be on the planner. It's going to be complicated.
It definitely is. And, we're going to struggle with it in the short term. I know a very good friend of mine who is actively involved in All Seated. Are you familiar with the room diagramming software? So
All Seated, absolutely.
Yeah, so they just came out with a update which allows for a social distancing template or overlay to ensure that all 6 feet, that people are appropriately distanced in seating plans. And I believe it's optional, but I know I read a press release on it. They definitely have a template that ensures that people are 6 feet across from one another, or just appropriately spaced. But we didn't really come up with what we suggest the uniform standard would be. We just suggested that the scale of our individual venues is maintained, so that, really large spaces should be able to do the largest number of people, and the more intimate spaces handle, the more intimate numbers.
Yeah, it's proportional. What else what did you come up with in terms of some of the more major protocols that the task force is suggesting?
Gosh, so any direct touch, things like place cards might be a thing of the past. Digital registration might be the way that people go, or even registration in advance. Take, for example, the lanyards that you see at association meetings or things like that. It might very well be that you receive yours in the mail. That would be sensible. There are things like the coat check experience and what that is going to look like.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
Are you going to want to check your coat? Are you going to want to zip it into a bag, which is resistant or, airtight, and then hand that over to somebody and put it on the rack? I mean, any way that you play it, I think the days of just handing your coat to somebody and having it sit on the rack next to 25 other coats are gone. Some of us suggested that, there's sort of a cubby system where there's enough space for you to put your coat in, and then you close a door, kind of the way that you could charge your cell phone at a cell phone charging station. You're responsible for your own coat. You feel the personal security of knowing that you're locked up and you're not touching, another coat. And then, we talked about things like, even if you're able to exchange your coat, do you want a little ticket that has your number on it? I don't think you do, so can you take your cell phone and can you scan a QR code that gives you, access so that you could, without even touching something, take a picture of a QR code and poof, you have your number and you're checked in. And when it's time to leave, you send your number and your code is waiting there for you so that you don't have that in-person exchange. It just speaks to, there is so much to think about that, I'm sure.
Yeah, valet parking, for example.
Yeah, valet parking was, we had some of the most important valet agencies in the United States on the phone call to advise what the best practices would be. So, a company like Advanced Parking Concepts, who I'll call out because I've worked with them at each of my previous spaces. I know Maritza was on the call and, she had a lot to say. Even within this 40-page document that was put together and that was whittled down to 20 for the policy and suggestions that we shared with our local political leaders, I'm still sure that, we overlooked some things just because it's meaningful to everyone.
Is there a way to get this, for any of us to get a copy of this document?
Yeah, we're happy to share. I mean, now that it's gone through, and one of the things that was really important to us in putting together the initial group, which was all hotel and private event venue leadership of, some of the most important and iconic properties in New York City, and then some catering team members that were on board. And then in Alan's wisdom and Mike's wisdom and James's wisdom, we invited executive stewards and back of the house folks and culinary team members to be involved also so they could advise on their relevant areas of expertise, bringing them in. And then once we had the ideas together, we presented it to a group of third-party planners. We wanted to look over and from the optics of a customer and what would make them feel comfortable, or as a planner in our building, what would make them feel comfortable. We had a peer review that just read over it and said, this is really good. This is probably an area that you still have some work to do. And, they love being involved also. And then finally, we shared it with our strategic partners throughout the industry, a set of decorators and entertainment companies and production companies who operate throughout the country. That was really important to us, too.
Yeah. Well, what I'd like to do is put it in the show notes so that people can, theweddingbiz.com, that they can go there and get a copy of it. I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I'd love to do it. But, basically, I don't think it's groundbreaking. I don't think in reading any of this, you could read into it and say, that makes perfect sense. We just don't want to be handling food that other people are about to consume, So, maybe passing an hors d'oeuvre is a little less exciting than it used to be. But we did put together some protocols that allows for a more secure environment. So, what happened if do you know those little pill boxes? They have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday on it.
Sure.
What if you had an hors d'oeuvre and you had the ability to butler pass it, and you open your individual, pill box and take out your hors d'oeuvre, and then you close yours, and then you go to the next person. These, there are companies that manufacture these from lucite, and they look really dynamite. Would you feel comfortable in that environment?
Yeah, interesting.
Just all kinds of provocative, thoughtful ways of doing what we do. And then for those that don't feel comfortable, what happens if a not-for-profit gala does away with their general and VIP receptions, and the dinner and the performance and the speaker portion is the event from now on? Because how exciting are people going to be about being corralled in an area with 600 people, many of whom they don't know, and until we have a vaccine, it might be that those go away. So, how do we handle that? How do we come up with creative food solutions? I mean, in the obvious category, things like buffets and, the idea that you walk over to a samovar and you fill up a cup of coffee on the buffet,
right.
and
right.
the 50 people, operate the little handle before you. How jazzed are you about that?
Yeah.
So as a barista who's making your coffee, and then putting it into a cup with a lid, is that a more secure environment? So it's all of these things.
Well, and even though some of what's in the document, could be considered obvious, at the same time, it's a fantastic starting point, for all of us. I think that's at a minimum, it's going to be helpful in that sense.
And I agree with you, and I'm proud of what we put together. So I would say in reading each individual bullet point, you would say, that's pretty obvious to me. But when you look at the enormity of the document and the scale to which, we really assembled, a whole bunch of this strategy, it's impressive in the volume of thought that was put into this and the specificity of each individual area of concern. The idea that we talk about dishwashing, the idea that the same document focuses on, what a site inspection with a prospective customer looks like. And in the same document, we're talking about how a self-park scenario might be preferable to something else. It's just all of these things in one document, the enormity. And I'm happy to share it with you. I mean, the reason that we put it together is to share some thoughts about how to make everybody safer. So it's pretty impressive when you look at it as the entirety of this document.
And Alan, before we go, was there any discussion, even not in the document, but just simply in the room, about how some of these new safety checks are going to affect just simply the cost of business? Like for sanitation equipment, for example, and technologies that we're going to need. I mean, perhaps even to screen people as they enter the venue. Did anyone talk about how this might affect the pricing?
Yeah, I mean, listen, these are 30 senior people, and I think by the time it was done, it was probably 40 or 45 senior people that, are in luxury hotels or luxury business environments and have profit and loss responsibility, and, everybody has somebody that they report to. We would be crazy if we didn't talk about the expenses associated with. Yeah, I mean, we spoke to it on the basis of technology, and they have these systems that are essentially gateways that people walk through, and they immediately intuit, people's core body temperature and can alert you if, a guest attending the event has a fever. It looks at their oxygen saturation and can give you that information. There are a whole bunch of questionable metrics that it interprets in, nanoseconds. I don't know if that's accurate, but in a short period of time, let's put it that way.
Right.
And the capital investment is enormous. I think the particular piece of equipment that we were talking about as a group is $35,000. Now, you think $35,000 is a lot of money, but then you look at a property like ours where we need one at the loading dock. There are 2 revolving doors. There's 3 sets of double doors. There is so now $35,000 is quickly turned into $275,000 because you need them in multiple locations. I mean, if you have to push people through the same turnstile on the MTA because they put in the same technology, I mean, how does creating that artificial density improve the situation? I don't think it does. So you need to spread people out and have them come from different entrances, which means different equipment. And that's that. forget about, the costs associated with masks and the elevated cleaning materials that you need that are bona fide in their ability to kill the virus. Yeah, I mean, there's huge financial impact. And I've spoken with some customers, and listen, these customers are the anomaly. People want their guests to feel safe. They get it and their head's in the right place. But I have had a couple of customers that are looking for, I actually have one person that just asked for the COVID discount.
Oh.
And, my response was, COVID discount, consider that the cost of business is going to go up.
That's right.
Because of COVID. Think about all of the additions. Think about, how the food shortages that are, you read about the chicken plants and the pork plants and, this kind of stuff and how they're having a difficult time. As a result, the cost of business keeps going up. Taking the personal protective equipment out of the equation. And then the capital expenditure that you have for things like those gateways we were talking about, and the infrared thermometers and the no-touch thermometers and that sort of thing. It's going to be a whole lot more expensive to be a business operator in a business climate where people aren't rushing to go back to the business and doing events.
That's right. Well, and I'm afraid there's going to be a temptation for a lot of not the large companies, but like independent caterers, planners, photographers, videographers, to discount the price coming back into business. And I fervently believe we should not do that. Absolutely not have any consideration in lowering our prices. All of us really need to come together with that. And they could bring up some of the issues that you just brought up as to why.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really fair. I'm pretty proud of the group that was involved in putting this document together. And they are real pros. And it was done with the highest regard for, safety and mutual respect. And, like I said, collaboration amongst a group of people that are not well known for being hugely collaborative, very professional and very innovative and creative, but not necessarily teammates, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. But the work that we did was great, and the ethical level that we operated on was huge also. So things like the cost and price point integrity and things like that, we really tried to stay away from, because you get into legal gray area. This is not about colluding. This is not about fixing price points or anything like that. So we were really careful to stay away from that. But I agree with you, as an independent operator of the glass houses, right, as somebody that's responsible for the sales of, our own business unit, you have to resist the temptation to lower your pricing to sign on questionable business, because the pricing that you establish becomes the new standard, because people share and people talk, and that's just the nature of what we do, They're sharing the price paid. But with the expenses going up so significantly and the competition being so fierce, I think you're going to find a lot of people are going to compromise the price point integrity. And I think they will likely run into huge challenges. The margins aren't going to be there. They're going to have a difficult time sustaining the business that they have.
That's right.
And it would be really short-term thinking to get into that situation. I saw some of this in the time following the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008, and even September 11th. That was probably an easier scenario in 2001, if you can believe it, being in New York City, because after it became clear that this was not, it certainly was a coordinated terrorist attack on September 11th, but in the days, weeks, months following it, when we saw that they didn't have the sophistication to necessarily start flying more planes into buildings, there was actually a great response from the nation in affecting events to New York City. I don't think you could expect that in COVID, but I know a lot of event spaces that had a difficult time because they compromised their price point integrity, and they became the cheapest. And in the short term, they did lots of events. But over the long term, they lock themselves into that pricing.
Well, and look, and the value of our creativity is staying the same. It's not going down. So, well, Alan, I really appreciate you coming on the show to help with this. Again, I'll put a link in the show notes so people can see that document. really appreciate you taking the time and to share this.
It was a pleasure to be here, Andy. I so enjoyed it. And hopefully the next time we get to speak, it's about a happier subject.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you.
You've got it.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Alan Shukovsky. Check out the website for The Glass Houses at theglasshouses.com. And you can find them on Instagram at the.glasshouses. And we will have all of this in the show notes at our website of theweddingbiz.com. And then this next Monday, I'm releasing my interview of the popular LA-based planner-designer Lisa Vorsay. Be sure to look out for that release. And lastly, it would be great if you can share this episode with friends and colleagues who can also get something out of this topic of having protocols for having events during the pandemic. And I want to thank our sponsor, Kushner Entertainment, and we'll catch you next week on The Wedding Biz.